Millionaire thought he was marrying an ugly woman in arranged marriage, but he was shocked when she... Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. Ethan Hayes never believed in love. At 32 years old, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Hayes Dynamics, a technology empire his late father had built from the ground up. To him, marriage was not about feelings or forever. It was a transaction, a shield against gossip and corporate chaos. When the board demanded that he settle down to secure the company's future, Ethan agreed. On one condition: the bride would be chosen by the family attorneys. "It is only business," he said calmly, signing the final document. The next morning, a newspaper headline spread across the city: "Billionaire Ethan Hayes to marry the reclusive Clara Monroe." Beneath the words was a blurry photograph of a woman with half of her face hidden by shadow. The tabloids called her the Beast Bride. Rumors claimed she was plain, scarred, and awkward. Ethan did not care. Appearance meant nothing when love was never part of the deal. His mother, frail but proud, pleaded softly. "Ethan, do not do this out of spite. Marriage is not a contract." He kissed her hand. "It is for the company, Mother. It is for the foundation Father started. After this, they will leave us alone." On a gray October afternoon, the wedding took place inside a small private chapel overlooking the Hudson River. The ceremony was quiet, the air filled only with the faint hum of the organ. No reporters were allowed. No guests, besides the lawyer and two witnesses. Clara arrived in a simple ivory gown, her face veiled in lace. She walked slowly, gracefully, as if every step was a promise to herself. Ethan stood tall at the altar, his expression unreadable. The officiant spoke the words, and the two exchanged vows that sounded more like legal terms than declarations of love. When the ring slipped onto her finger, Ethan caught a glimpse of her hand, delicate, steady, not trembling. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Ethan said, his voice firm, almost mechanical. A flash of camera light from outside the window startled Clara. She turned slightly, the lace shifting enough for a hint of her face to appear. For a moment, Ethan saw something unexpected, a quiet strength behind the veil. Eyes that did not plead or fear, only endure. When the ceremony ended, Ethan signed the marriage certificate without hesitation. She signed next, her handwriting steady and precise. As the church bells rang faintly in the distance, Ethan told himself this would change nothing. She was a name on a contract. But as he opened the car door for her, her soft "thank you" lingered in the air longer than it should have. And for the first time in years, Ethan Hayes hesitated. The morning after the wedding, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Hayes Tower, the headquarters of Hayes Dynamics. Ethan Hayes sat behind his desk, his suit immaculate, his tie perfectly centered, but his mind far away. A thin silver band now circled his left hand. It glinted in the light like a quiet reminder that he had done something irreversible. His assistant, Mark, entered with a tablet and a hesitant look. "Sir, I think you should see this." Ethan glanced up. "What is it?" Mark placed the tablet on the desk. The screen showed a headline from the Manhattan Herald: "The Beast Bride of Billionaire Ethan Hayes." Below it, a blurry photograph captured Clara Monroe leaving the chapel, her veil half lifted by the wind. The camera had caught the faint outline of a scar along her cheek. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Who leaked this?" "We do not know yet," Mark replied carefully. "The photo spread overnight. Every major gossip site has picked it up. Some say she used her looks to force the marriage. Others claim she was paid. #BeastBride is trending." Ethan's fingers drummed against the desk, his tone even but sharp. "Pull every public relations statement. Silence the tabloids. I do not want a single headline using that phrase." Mark hesitated before asking the question that everyone in the office whispered. "Is it true, sir, that the marriage was arranged?" Ethan looked up, his gaze cold. "It is none of their concern." "Oh." Then softer, almost to himself, "It is none of mine either." Across the city, in the quiet apartment above a small art studio, Clara Monroe watched the same headlines on her old laptop. She had expected mockery, but not this cruelty. She closed the computer slowly, breathing through the tremor in her hands. The world saw her as a rumor, not a person. Her friend, Margaret, an older woman who had been her mentor since the fire, set a cup of tea beside her. "Do not let them define you, Clara." "Oh, I am not angry," Clara whispered. "I am just tired. They see the scar before they see the woman." Margaret smiled gently. "And yet, you still walk down that aisle. That takes more courage than they will ever know." That afternoon, Clara received an unexpected call from the Hayes residence. The voice of the butler was formal but polite. "Mrs. Hayes, the master requested your presence for dinner at 8. It was the first time anyone had called her that Mrs. Hayes. When she arrived at the mansion, the staff greeted her with professional courtesy, but studied her quietly, their expressions unreadable. The dining room was vast, its chandelier scattering light like crystal rain. Ethan was already seated at the head of the table, reading something on his phone. "Good evening," Clara said softly. He looked up briefly. "You are early. I was told 8. "It is 7:45, he said, folding the phone closed. "Sit." Dinner began in silence. The clink of silverware was the only sound between them. Clara ate carefully, aware of his occasional glances, but unsure what he was thinking. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Do the rumors bother you?" She set down her fork. "They hurt, yes. But I learned long ago that the world will always find something to mock." He studied her for a moment. "You do not seem surprised by any of this." "I have seen it before," she said simply. "When my face healed, people stopped looking at me as an artist. They looked at me as a cautionary tale." Ethan leaned back, his tone controlled. "You understand this marriage is not built on emotion. It exists for stability, nothing more. If you can maintain privacy, I will handle the rest." Clara nodded. "I never asked for anything else." For a few seconds, their eyes met. It was not warmth, not yet. But something in her calm gaze unsettled him. He had expected bitterness or self-pity. Instead, she carried dignity like armor. After dinner, Ethan walked her to the foyer. The night air outside was cool, scented faintly with rain. As she reached for her coat, he spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "Tomorrow there will be a press conference. You do not have to attend." She turned to him. "If I stay hidden, they will keep inventing stories. I would rather face them." Ethan's expression shifted just slightly. "You are braver than most people I know." Clara smiled faintly. "That is only because I have already lost everything that can be taken from me." When she left, Ethan stood by the doorway for a long moment. He watched her car disappear into the wet glow of the streetlights. Something in his chest tightened, an ache he could not name. The next day, the headlines shifted again. Cameras flashed as Clara Monroe Hayes stepped out of the black sedan in front of the Hayes Tower. She wore a navy blue dress, her hair pinned back, the faint mark on her cheek visible but not hidden. Reporters shouted questions, but she lifted her chin, unshaken. A journalist called out, "Mrs. Hayes, do you think your husband married you out of pity?" She paused, looked directly into the camera, and said clearly, "He married me out of respect. The rest is none of your concern." Inside, Ethan watched the live feed from his office. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then quietly, almost in disbelief, he whispered to himself, "Respect." Outside, the crowd's noise swelled, cameras flashing like thunder. But in that single word, spoken with calm conviction, Clara Monroe had rewritten the entire story. And for the first time, Ethan Hayes realized that the woman he thought he pitied might be the only one strong enough to match him. The press conference changed everything. For the first time since their arranged marriage, the public saw Clara Monroe Hayes not as a rumor, but as a woman with calm courage. Within hours, social media began to split in two, half mocked, half admired. #BeastBride was slowly replaced by respect. But for Ethan Hayes, the word echoed far beyond the screen. At Hayes Tower, board members gathered in the glass conference room overlooking the skyline. The air smelled of roasted coffee and tension. Ethan sat at the head of the table, silent as the board's vice president, Charles Whitman, cleared his throat. "Ethan," he began, choosing his words carefully, "while your wife's composure at the conference was admirable, the shareholders are concerned. They feel this marriage, public or not, threatens the image of Hayes Dynamics." Ethan's expression did not change. You mean it threatens your comfort? Public image matters, Charles said, voice sharpening. Investors are nervous. They expect a statement. They will have one, Ethan replied. From me, not from gossip columns. A long silence followed. The men in suits shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared challenge him further. When the meeting ended, Ethan stood at the window. The city stretched beneath him, alive and indifferent. He thought about Clara's words, respect. He had built his empire on logic, yet something about her quiet defiance unsettled him. That evening, he returned to the mansion earlier than usual. The house was unusually warm, the smell of baked bread floating from the kitchen. He followed the scent and stopped at the doorway. Clara stood at the counter, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied loosely, sunlight from the tall windows painting gold across her face. She turned when she sensed him. You are home early. I had enough of meetings for one day. That makes two of us, she said with a small smile. The tabloids followed me again. One even waited outside the grocery store. He frowned. Did they harass you? No, she said. I ignored them. I figured silence speaks louder than outrage. He hesitated before asking, why do you keep facing them? You could stay here, avoid the cameras. Clara placed the bread in the oven, then looked at him. If I hide, they win. I have lived through fire, Ethan. Words do not burn me anymore. He had no reply. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the oven and the faint rain tapping against the windows. Later, they sat across from each other at the long dining table. For the first time, the silence between them felt less like distance and more like a fragile truce. Ethan noticed the small details, the way she folded her napkin carefully, the way she listened fully when he spoke, even if it was only about business. When dinner ended, he said quietly, tomorrow, there will be another board meeting. They want to see us together. Can you attend? She nodded. If it helps, yes. It will, he said. Then softer, almost to himself. They need to see what I saw yesterday. The next morning, Clara arrived at the corporate lobby in a modest cream dress and a simple silver necklace. The staff turned to look, surprised by her calm presence. Ethan met her at the elevator. Are you ready? As ready as I can be, she answered, straightening her sleeve. Inside the conference room, cameras clicked, flashes burst, and questions poured in. Ethan stood beside her, his voice steady as he addressed the press. This company was founded on resilience and integrity. My wife embodies both. That is all the statement we will give. Clara did not speak much, but when she did, it was with quiet authority. Beauty fades, character does not. I am proud to stand beside a man who understands that difference. The room fell silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment. That night, back at the mansion, Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine. You were remarkable today, he said. Clara smiled slightly. So were you. For once, you sounded like someone who believed in more than numbers. He looked down at the glass, then back at her. Perhaps you are right. I spent so long protecting an image that I forgot what it means to protect a person. She tilted her head, studying him. And now? Now, he said. I am not sure which one I am saving. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. It was soft, almost hesitant, like something she had forgotten how to do. You do not have to save me, Ethan. You just have to see me. That night, long after she went upstairs, Ethan stood alone in the study. On the table lay a stack of business papers beside a tabloid photograph of Clara. He picked it up, looked at the scar that others mocked, and realized he could not remember when he stopped noticing it. Outside, the rain turned into snow. For the first time in years, Ethan Hayes did not feel the weight of his empire pressing down on him. Instead, he felt something new. Unfamiliar peace. In the quiet glow of his office lamp, he whispered to himself, respect was never enough. She deserves more than that. And though he would not admit it aloud, Ethan Hayes, the man who once believed love was only a weakness, found himself wondering what it might be like to earn hers. A week after the press conference, the noise began to fade. The headlines that once mocked Clara Monroe Hayes now turned toward curiosity. Articles shifted from insult to intrigue. Who is the mysterious wife of the billionaire CEO? The woman behind the scar and the strength. For the first time, Ethan Hayes felt the pressure ease. The board meetings grew quieter, investors calmer. Yet peace was not what unsettled him. It was something else, something softer, something that made him notice the sound of her footsteps when she passed the library or the faint hum of her voice as she worked in the small studio at the back of the house. That evening, Ethan walked past the studio door and saw it slightly open. Inside, Clara stood before an easel, her fingers stained with shades of blue and ochre. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and jasmine. On the canvas, a stormy seascape was coming to life. Dark waves, a glimmer of light breaking through the clouds. He knocked gently. "May I come in?" She turned, surprised. "You may, though I am afraid it is a mess in here." He stepped inside, his shoes quiet on the wooden floor. "You paint?" "Oh, quote. I restore paintings mostly," she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "But sometimes I paint to remember that I can still create something new." He looked at the canvas again. "It is beautiful." Clara smiled faintly. "It is unfinished, like most things worth keeping." They stood there in silence for a moment, the rain tapping lightly against the windows. Ethan found himself studying her face, the faint scar that caught the light, the steadiness in her posture, the quiet focus in her eyes. He realized then how wrong the world had been about her. "Clara," he said softly, "you never asked me why I agreed to this marriage." "I assumed you had your reasons," she replied, returning to her palette. "I did it to protect my father's foundation. Without a wife, the board would have stripped me of control. They wanted someone respectable, someone who looked stable beside me." She looked up. "And did I ruin that image for you?" He hesitated. "At first, I thought you would. Now, I am not sure I deserve the image you give me." Her brush paused mid-air. "That is an unexpected compliment, Mr. Hayes." He almost smiled. "Perhaps, but it is true." Later that night, Clara found herself thinking about his words. For weeks, she had lived under his roof as a figure of convenience, a name on a contract. Yet in the small gestures, a pulled-out chair, a shared breakfast, a look that lingered longer than before, she began to sense something shifting. The next morning, the house came alive with the quiet hum of preparation. The annual Hayes Foundation Gala was only 2 days away, and it would be their first public appearance together as husband and wife. Stylists arrived, decorators rushed in, and reporters waited for a glimpse of the couple. Clara stood in front of the mirror as a designer adjusted the neckline of her dress. "Do you think this is too much?" she asked softly. The stylist shook her head. "It is perfect, elegant, simple, confident. You will silence them all." That evening, Ethan entered the room just as Clara fastened a silver clasp on her bracelet. He stopped mid-step. The soft fabric of her gown shimmered under the chandelier's light, framing her with quiet grace. For a long moment, he did not speak. "You look," his voice faltered slightly before he recovered. "You look like you belong there." She turned to him. "At your side, you mean?" "At the center of it all," he said. The night of the gala arrived with cold autumn wind sweeping across the city. Cameras flashed as the couple stepped out of the car and into the marble entrance of the Grand Metropolis Hotel. Reporters leaned forward, microphones raised, but Ethan kept his hand firm at Clara's back, guiding her past the crowd. Inside, chandeliers glowed, glasses clinked, and the orchestra filled the air with soft classical music. Every gaze turned toward them. Some faces smiled politely, others whispered behind champagne flutes. Charles Whitman, the vice president, approached with a measured grin. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, wonderful of you to join us." His eyes flicked briefly to Clara's face, then back to Ethan. "You have quite a brave wife. I admit, she surprised us all." Clara met his gaze calmly. "I find that people are often surprised when they see strength where they expected shame." Charles blinked, caught off guard, before forcing a smile. "Indeed." He turned away. Ethan hid a small smile behind his glass of wine. As the night went on, Clara moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, speaking with donors and artists, never once faltering. When she laughed, it was genuine. When she listened, it was full. The guests who once whispered about her scar now found themselves watching her with admiration. From across the room, Ethan could not look away. There was something magnetic about the way she held herself, not with arrogance, but with dignity. It reminded him of why his father had built the foundation in the first place, to honor resilience. Later that night, as the music softened and the crowd began to leave, Ethan found Clara standing alone by the balcony, the city lights glittering below. "You handled them perfectly," he said quietly. She turned, her hair brushing against her shoulders. "They are just people, Ethan. Once they see that I am not afraid, they lose power." He nodded, his gaze lingering. "You make it sound simple." "It is not," she said. "But fear only grows when you hide from it." They stood side by side for a while, the cool air brushing between them. Then she looked up at him and said softly, "You do not have to keep defending me. I can stand on my own." "I know," he said. "That is why I find myself wanting to stand beside you anyway." For the first time, Clara did not look away. The world around them faded into the sound of distant violins and city wind. In that brief, unguarded silence, something fragile and real began to form, something no contract could ever define. The night of the gala marked a turning point. For the first time since their marriage, Ethan Hayes and Clara Monroe Hayes had stood together not as strangers bound by contract, but as equals standing in the same light. The image of them, her calm confidence beside his quiet pride, spread across every newspaper the next morning. The scarred wife who silenced New York's elite. The CEO who chose dignity over vanity. But beneath that glittering success, something else began to stir, something neither of them could yet name. Days passed in a rare calm. Ethan buried himself in work while Clara spent hours in her studio, restoring a painting for the city museum. Their lives still moved in parallel, but now there were small intersections that had never existed before. He would pause at her studio door on his way out, saying, "Do not forget to eat lunch." She would glance up from her canvas and reply, "Do not forget to live outside the office." One morning, as the first snow fell over Manhattan, Clara woke early to the sound of piano notes drifting from the grand hall downstairs. The melody was soft, hesitant, as if testing its way through silence. When she walked down, she saw Ethan at the piano, his fingers moving slowly across the keys. "I did not know you played," she said. He looked up, a hint of embarrassment crossing his face. "Barely. My mother used to insist I practice. I stopped after college." "It is beautiful," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "It sounds like memory." He gave a quiet laugh. "It sounds like rust." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them carried something warm, something unspoken. Then Ethan stood abruptly. "I should get to work." As the door closed behind him, Clara touched the piano keys again. The notes he had played still lingered, like something unfinished. That afternoon, while Ethan attended a meeting across town, a different storm was brewing at Hayes Dynamics. Veronica Reed, Ethan's former fiancée, had returned from Europe, her eyes set on reclaiming what she believed was hers. Elegant and calculating, she arrived at the company unannounced, carrying a bouquet of white lilies and a smile that did not reach her eyes. When she entered Ethan's office, his secretary froze. "Miss Reed, Mr. Hayes is in a meeting." "I will wait," Veronica said, seating herself comfortably. He always hated being kept waiting. Consider this poetic balance. When Ethan returned, he stopped short at the sight of her. "Veronica, I was told you were in Paris." "I was," she replied smoothly, standing. "But then I saw the headlines. Ethan Hayes, married to a woman he barely knows. Quite the scandal." He crossed his arms. "If you came here to gossip, you can leave." "Relax," she said, her tone playful but cold. "I only came to see how much damage you have done to yourself. Tell me, did the pity wedding save your reputation?" Ethan's eyes hardened. "Do not insult her." "Her?" Veronica's voice sharpened. "You mean the woman who hides behind charity work and pity stories?" "You always had a weakness for broken things, Ethan." He took a step closer, his voice low but steady. "She is stronger than you could ever understand." Veronica smiled thinly. "Then I suppose she will not mind a little truth coming out. After all, she has nothing to hide, does she?" The threat in her tone was unmistakable. As she walked out, Ethan felt a cold unease settle in his chest. Veronica Reed had never returned without an agenda. That evening, when he came home, Clara was arranging flowers in the foyer. She turned to him, sensing the tension on his face. "Rough day?" He hesitated. An old acquaintance stopped by the office. She waited, but he said no more. Instead, she offered a calm smile. "Sometimes old acquaintances remind us why we moved on." Her words were gentle, but they struck something deep within him. The next morning, the storm arrived in the form of headlines. Veronica Reed accuses Mrs. Hayes of lying about her past. Did the Beast Bride buy her way into the Hayes fortune? The article spread like wildfire. Online forums speculated about forged documents, hidden settlements, and secret motives. Ethan's phone rang nonstop. The board demanded answers. When Clara saw the news, she did not cry. She closed her laptop and walked quietly to the balcony, the winter wind cutting through her thin sweater. The city below glittered with indifference. That evening, Ethan found her there, standing beneath the pale light. "You saw it," he said. "I did. I will handle it," he promised. "I will find out who started it." "There is no need," she said softly. "I already know." He frowned. "Veronica?" Clara nodded. "She does not need to destroy my reputation, Ethan. She only needs to make you doubt me." He stepped closer. "She will fail." Clara turned, meeting his eyes. "Are you sure?" For a long moment they stood in silence, the distance between them filled with everything they could not say. Finally she spoke, her voice steady. "I can live with lies from strangers, but I cannot live with doubt from you." Ethan wanted to answer, but the words would not come. Instead, he reached out, as if to bridge the space between them, but she stepped back. "Good night, Ethan," she said quietly, and walked past him toward the stairs. He stood there long after she was gone, the winter air chilling his breath, the sound of her fading footsteps echoing through the hall like a warning he could not yet understand. For the first time since their wedding, the mansion felt empty again. Snow blanketed the city the next morning, soft and soundless, as if New York itself had grown tired of the noise. Yet inside the Hayes mansion, silence felt heavier than the storm outside. Ethan Hayes sat in his study, the glow of his laptop casting faint light across his face. Headlines still screamed from every corner of the internet, stories that twisted truth into spectacle. The Beast Bride's secret past, forgery scandal, in the Hayes, marriage. He closed the screen and leaned back, pressing a hand to his forehead. For a man who had spent his life mastering control, this was the first time he felt it slipping through his fingers. Downstairs, Clara stood by the window, watching the snow fall in slow spirals. She had not spoken to Ethan since the night before. Her calm expression hid the ache she refused to name. The rumors had not hurt her pride. They had only reminded her how fragile truth could be when others decided to sell lies. Margaret called that afternoon, her voice warm through the phone. "Clara, I saw the news. Are you holding up?" "I am fine," Clara said softly. "It is strange how quickly people believe what they want to believe." "You do not have to stay quiet," Margaret said. "You could clear your name." Clara smiled faintly. "The people who matter will know." The rest never cared to look deeper. When evening came, Ethan finally stepped out of his study. He found her in the library, curled up in a chair with a cup of tea gone cold beside her. The fire flickered low, painting her face in gold and shadow. "Clara?" he began, his tone low, cautious. She looked up from her book, her eyes calm but distant. "Yes? We need to talk about the rumors." "There is nothing to talk about," she said. "They will run their course." "That is not enough," he insisted. "They are attacking your integrity, and by extension, mine." Her gaze met his evenly. "Do you care about my integrity or your image?" The question hung between them, sharp and quiet. Ethan hesitated. "I care about both." "Then you are already choosing one over the other," she said, standing. "You cannot protect both the truth and your reputation when people demand one to destroy the other." He stepped closer. "I can fix this. I can issue a statement. I can have the lawyers." She shook her head. "You cannot fix something that was never broken. What people say about me does not define who I am." "And what if I believe it does?" he said without thinking, the frustration in his voice raw. Her breath caught for just a moment, then she nodded slowly. "Then we are done talking." She walked past him, leaving the faint scent of paint and jasmine in the air. He did not move. The truth was, he did not know why he had said it. Fear had spoken before reason. Fear that the world might take everything he had built, including her. Hours later, he sat alone by the fire, the untouched tea beside him now cold. The mansion, once echoing with quiet comfort, felt hollow again. The next morning, Clara left the house early. Her driver took her to a community center in Brooklyn, where she often volunteered to teach art therapy. The children there knew her not as Mrs. Hayes, but as Miss Clara. They greeted her with smiles, their small hands clutching brushes and water cups. "Miss Clara, are you famous?" one little girl asked, her eyes bright. Clara laughed gently. "Famous is just a word people use when they forget to see who you really are." For the next few hours, she painted with them, her laughter mixing with theirs. Here, she did not have to be the woman on magazine covers. Here, she could breathe. Back in Manhattan, Ethan sat in a meeting with his legal team. "We traced the leak," one of the attorneys said. "It came from Veronica Reed's media contact. We can press charges if you wish." Ethan leaned back. "No, not yet. That is what she wants to turn this into a public war. I will not give her that satisfaction." "But the damage is spreading," the lawyer warned. "People are questioning the validity of your marriage." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Then let them question it. The only person who owes me an answer is my wife." That evening, when Clara returned home, she found him waiting in the living room. The fireplace burned brighter than usual, the air thick with tension and something unspoken. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said. "I let my fear speak for me. I doubted you when I should have defended you." Clara stood by the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Doubt is not the problem, Ethan. It is what you do with it." "I know," he said, "and I am trying to learn." He took a hesitant step forward. "I found out who spread the rumors. It was Veronica." I already knew," Clara replied softly. "I told you she only needed to make you question me." "And she succeeded," he admitted, "but only for a moment. The rest of me knows better." Clara looked at him then, really looked at him. "Words are easy, Ethan. Trust is not." "I will earn it back," he said. For a long moment, they stood there, in the glow of the fire, two people bound by a marriage neither had planned, yet now held together by something fragile and unfinished. Clara finally nodded. "Then start by believing in what you see, not what others tell you." She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, he said quietly, "I see you, Clara. I see who you are." She paused, the faintest flicker of emotion crossing her face, then walked upstairs without another word. That night, Ethan sat by the dying fire, watching the embers fade to ash. Somewhere above him, a light flickered on in her studio. The storm outside was finally ending, but the one between them was only beginning to calm. The snow melted slowly over the next few days, leaving the streets of Manhattan washed clean and shining under pale sunlight. From the outside, the Hayes mansion looked calm again, but inside, something fragile still lingered between Ethan and Clara, an unspoken distance built from pride, fear, and the quiet ache of almost understanding each other. Ethan spent most of his hours at the office, diving deeper into work as if he could bury guilt under contracts and spreadsheets. But even the endless hum of the city could not drown out the memory of Clara's steady voice. "Start by believing in what you see." It echoed whenever he closed his eyes. Clara, meanwhile, threw herself into her art. She spent hours in her studio, her brushstrokes firm, her colors darker than before. She was painting a portrait not of a face, but of light breaking through storm clouds. It was not finished, but she painted as if her heart depended on it. One morning, she received a call from the Brooklyn Community Center. The art program for the children had lost funding, and the director sounded defeated. "We will have to close next month unless we can raise enough to cover the rent," the woman said. Clara sat silently for a moment. Then she said, "I will help." Later that day, she arrived at Hayes Dynamics, unannounced. The receptionist blinked in surprise when she stepped into the lobby. "Mrs. Hayes, should I tell Mr. Hayes you are here?" Clara shook her head. "No, thank you. I just need to leave something for him." She walked straight to his office, where his assistant Mark greeted her with nervous politeness. "He is in a meeting," Mark said. "I know," Clara replied. She placed a small envelope on Ethan's desk. "Please make sure he sees this." When Ethan returned later, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single-page proposal. Clara had outlined an idea to sponsor art therapy programs for underprivileged children under the Hayes Foundation's name. At the bottom, in her careful handwriting, she had added one line: "Sometimes healing others is how we remember to heal ourselves." Ethan read the note twice. He did not know why, but something in that sentence struck deeper than any corporate report could. That evening, he drove to the mansion earlier than usual. He found Clara in her studio, still painting under the soft glow of the lamp. "You came home early," she said without turning. "I read your proposal," he said. "It was good." "Was?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "It is," he corrected quickly. "I already approved it. The foundation will fund the entire program." She paused, brush in hand. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to," he said, "because it matters to you." "Oh?" For the first time in weeks, she smiled, small but genuine. "Thank you." Ethan hesitated. "You are welcome." The next weekend, they visited the community center together. The children greeted Clara with bright voices, running to hug her. Ethan watched quietly as she knelt beside a boy, struggling to hold a paintbrush steady. "Try again," Clara said gently. "There is no wrong way to paint. Every mistake becomes part of the story." Ethan stood in the doorway, something warm stirring inside him. For years, he had measured success in numbers and headlines. But here, watching her laugh among children who saw no scars, he realized that this her quiet strength, her empathy, was something he had never known how to measure. After class, they walked through the nearby park, snow melting into soft puddles under their shoes. The air smelled faintly of pine and cold earth. "Those kids adore you," Ethan said. "They adore color," Clara replied, smiling. "I just remind them they can make their own." He glanced at her, his tone softer. "You make me see color too." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. For a moment, she saw the man behind the suit, the one who played piano when he thought no one was listening, the one who had begun to look at her not with calculation, but with quiet wonder. When they returned home, Clara found a note on the piano. It was Ethan's handwriting. "For the first time, the house feels alive. Maybe it is because you are in it." She folded the note carefully, hiding a smile she did not mean to show. But peace never lasted long in the Hayes household. The next morning, while Ethan was preparing for a major investor presentation, his phone buzzed with a message that froze him in place. It was from Veronica Reed. "You can fund every charity you want, Ethan, but one truth about your wife, and it all falls apart." Attached was a photograph Clara, standing outside the Brooklyn Center, handing money to a woman. The caption read, "Mrs. Hayes secretly paying witnesses to protect her fake past." Ethan's chest tightened. Logic told him it was another fabrication, another ploy. But doubt, familiar and poisonous, crept back before he could stop it. That evening, when Clara returned home, he was waiting in the living room. His tone was clipped, too controlled. "Where were you this afternoon?" She blinked. "At the community center." "Why?" He showed her the photo on his phone. "What is this supposed to mean?" Clara stared at the screen, then back at him. "It means Veronica followed me. The woman in that photo is the center's manager. I gave her a check for supplies." "You did not think to tell me?" "I did not know I needed to report every act of kindness," she said quietly. He exhaled, tension still thick between them. "You do not understand how much the press can twist." "And you do not understand how much I am tired of being doubted," she replied. Her voice was calm, but the hurt beneath it was clear. She set her keys on the table, her gaze steady. "If you still cannot see who I am by now, Ethan, maybe you never will." Then she turned and walked toward the staircase. He did not follow. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving him alone once again in the silent mansion, surrounded by everything he thought he wanted, and realizing none of it mattered without her trust. That night, the mansion felt colder than ever. The silence stretched between its marble walls like a living thing. Ethan Hayes sat in his office, the city lights reflecting faintly on the glass behind him. The photo from Veronica still glowed on his phone screen. He knew it was a trap, but knowing did not silence the doubt pressing inside his chest. He thought of Clara's voice before she left the room. "If you still cannot see who I am by now, Ethan, maybe you never will." The words echoed in the hollow space where his certainty used to live. Upstairs, Clara stood in her studio, staring at the unfinished painting on the easel, the one of light breaking through clouds. She had painted that light to remind herself that storms never lasted forever. But now, even the light on the canvas seemed dimmer. She packed a small suitcase quietly, placing inside only what mattered: a sketchbook, her grandmother's locket, and the folded note Ethan had once left on the piano. She hesitated before tucking it in, as if unsure whether the memory it carried was still true. The next morning, when Ethan woke, the house was silent. Her studio light was off. On the table near the piano, there was a letter. His name was written in her careful handwriting. He unfolded it slowly. Ethan, I did not marry you for protection or money. I married you because, for a moment, I believed our agreement could become something real. I believed you could see me, not the scar, not the headlines, not the contract. But every time the world whispers, you turn away. I need peace, not pity. Do not look for me. When you decide to trust what you feel instead of what others say, maybe then you will understand who I really am. Clara. He sat in silence for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. He wanted to chase her immediately, but pride, his oldest armor, kept him rooted to the chair. Hours passed before he finally stood. He called Mark into his office. Find out where she went. Mark hesitated. Sir, she asked me to deliver this to you only after she had already left. He handed Ethan a small folder. Inside was a report of all the art therapy centers Clara had worked with over the past year. The last one listed was in Maine. Maine? Ethan asked. Yes, sir, Mark said softly. She mentioned once that she loved the light there for painting. That night, Ethan boarded his private jet without telling anyone. The snow returned as he landed in a quiet coastal town in northern Maine. The streets were lined with small cottages and pine trees dusted in white. It was far from New York, far from noise, and far from pride. He asked around until a local woman pointed him toward an art school by the water. You must mean Miss Monroe, the woman said. She teaches the children here. Sweet soul, that one. When Ethan arrived, he stopped at the door. Through the glass, he saw Clara surrounded by children, helping them paint the sunset over the frozen sea. Her laughter floated through the air, soft and real. She looked peaceful in a way he had never seen before. He did not go in immediately. He watched her for several minutes, trying to understand what he was feeling. The woman he had doubted, the woman he had nearly broken, was still giving everything she had to others. When the class ended, Clara cleaned the brushes and dismissed the children. As she turned, she froze. Ethan stood in the doorway, snow melting on his coat, his eyes tired but steady. Ethan, she said quietly, you should not be here. I know, he replied, but I had to see you. She folded her arms, her tone calm but firm. What do you want from me? He took a slow breath. I want to say I was wrong. I let fear turn me into someone I do not want to be. Her gaze did not soften. Fear does not excuse betrayal. I know, he said again. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to prove that I have learned to believe you. Clara looked away toward the window. Outside, the sun had started to set, painting the sky in gold and rose. You always speak like everything can be fixed with effort, she said. But some things break quietly. Trust is one of them. He stepped closer. Then let me rebuild it, even if it takes the rest of my life. For a moment, silence filled the small studio. The light caught the edge of her scar, turning it into something luminous, almost sacred. Finally, she said softly, you cannot rebuild trust with words, Ethan. You rebuild it by being someone who does not need to be trusted twice. Bet? He nodded slowly. Then I will start there. Before she could respond, one of the children ran back into the room, waving a small canvas. Miss Clara, I forgot this. The boy smiled at Ethan, unbothered by the tension in the air. Clara took the painting and laughed softly. You did not forget. You just wanted to show off again. The boy grinned, then ran back outside. Ethan watched the moment unfold with quiet awe. The way she spoke to the child with patience, warmth, and grace reminded him why he had fallen for her in the first place, even when he did not recognize it as love. As she turned back to him, her voice was gentler now. You should go home, Ethan. You have a company to run, and I have children to teach. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, This is home, Clara, or at least, it used to be. Then, without another word, he left the studio. Outside, the snow had begun again, light, quiet, unrelenting. Ethan Hayes walked through it slowly, realizing that sometimes losing everything was the only way to understand what it truly meant to love. The following morning, The small coastal town in Maine awoke to the sound of church bells echoing through the cold air. Ethan Hayes had not slept. He had spent the night at a modest inn by the harbor, staring at the letter Clara had left behind. The ink had begun to fade from where his thumb pressed against the paper, but the weight of her words felt heavier than ever. He watched the sunrise over the frozen water, his breath fogging the glass. For the first time in his adult life, there was nothing left to calculate, no meeting to attend, no empire to protect. All that remained was the quiet truth that he had failed the only person who had ever demanded nothing from him. By mid-morning, he walked back to the art center. Inside, the laughter of children carried through the halls. Clara's voice guided them, calm and sure. When she noticed him standing at the doorway again, she did not seem surprised this time. "You came back," she said. "I am not leaving until you hear me out," he replied. The children were packing their art supplies, oblivious to the tension between their teacher and the stranger in the suit. When they left, Clara began cleaning the brushes. "You should not have followed me here," she said. "This place is peaceful. I would like to keep it that way." "I am not here to disturb your peace," Ethan said quietly. "I am here because I realized I never gave you any of mine." She set the brushes down, her eyes still focused on the table. "You cannot undo what has already been done." "I know," he said, "but I can stop repeating it." Clara turned to face him. "Then say what you came to say." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "When I first met you, I saw you as a solution. I thought marriage was just a business transaction. I did not understand what it meant to earn someone's faith. You showed me grace when I did not deserve it. And I repaid you with doubt." Her voice was steady but soft. "You repaid me with fear. You were afraid of being seen, just like everyone else who hides behind power." He nodded slowly. "You are right. But I am done hiding. I came here not to ask for forgiveness, but to offer something real." She frowned slightly. "What could you possibly offer me now?" Ethan reached into his coat and placed a folded document on the table. It was a letter of resignation from his position as CEO. "I have decided to step down. The board will take over. The company can survive without me. I cannot say the same for the life I want to build." Clara blinked, surprised. "You are giving up everything?" "I'm not giving it up," he said. "I'm choosing something else. I spent years building walls so high, I forgot what sunlight felt like. You reminded me." She studied him for a long moment. "Ethan, you cannot rebuild your life on regret." He smiled faintly. "Then let me rebuild it on truth." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Margaret, Clara's old mentor, appeared at the doorway, smiling warmly. "Clara, the board from the Art Center wants to meet you. They are impressed with your work." "No." Clara nodded, grateful for the distraction. "I will be there in a moment." When Margaret left, she turned back to Ethan. "You see, this is my life now. I do not need your name to define it." "I know," he said. "That is why I finally understand what love is supposed to look like. It is not possession, it is recognition." Her eyes softened, but her tone remained guarded. "Ethan, what you are feeling might just be guilt dressed as love." "Maybe," he admitted. "But guilt fades. Love does not." "No." For the first time, silence between them did not feel heavy. It felt fragile, like something waiting to be rebuilt. Clara picked up her scarf and walked toward the door. "I have a meeting to attend," she said. "If you truly meant what you said, prove it by doing something good. Even if I never see it." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then I will start today." When she left, he stood alone in the empty studio. The scent of paint and salt lingered in the air. On the easel beside him was a half-finished canvas of the ocean, under sunlight, the same painting he had seen from afar the first night he arrived. Beneath it, written in small letters, were the words, "Light does not wait for permission to shine." He stared at it for a long moment before walking out. That evening, he called Mark from a payphone near the harbor. "I want you to transfer $10 million to the Hayes Foundation's Community Fund," Ethan said. "Create a branch for rural art programs. Name it after Clara Monroe. Do not tell the press." Mark hesitated on the other end. "Understood, sir." Ethan hung up, his breath turning white in the cold air. For the first time, his actions felt simple, uncalculated, like something done not to fix, but to give. 2 weeks later, Clara received a letter from the foundation announcing a new program fully funded in her name. There was no signature, only a note attached. You once told me that healing others helps us heal ourselves. You were right. E.H. She read the letter 3 times before placing it inside her sketchbook. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Instead, she walked to the easel and dipped her brush into gold paint. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and steady, as if the world was ready to start over. And though they were miles apart, both Ethan and Clara painted the same quiet truth into their lives that night. Some storms end not with thunder, but with the courage to begin again. Spring came quietly to the coast of Maine. The snow that once blanketed the town melted into soft earth, and the sea regained its rhythm against the rocky shore. Clara Monroe Hayes stood at the window of the art center, watching sunlight spill across the water. She had lived there for nearly 3 months now, and though her days were filled with color and laughter, there was still a part of her that refused to rest. The new community art program had taken off faster than she expected. Children came from nearby towns to paint, sculpt, and dream. Every wall of the center was now alive with drawings of sunflowers, oceans, and skies too big for fear. It was the kind of work that gave her peace, honest, simple, and unpretentious. But even in peace, echoes of the past found her. Sometimes, when she stayed late to clean the brushes, she would glance at the empty corner where Ethan had once stood. It was always the same memory, his voice steady but uncertain, his eyes searching for forgiveness he had not earned. She told herself she had moved on. Yet, when the mail arrived one morning, with a sealed envelope marked from New York, her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a formal letter from the board of Hayes Dynamics. It read, Mrs. Clara Hayes, the board of the Hayes Foundation, invites you to the grand reopening of its charity division, the Renewal Project, to honor your contributions to art and healing. The event will be held in New York City next month. We would be honored by your presence. At the bottom was one small handwritten line that did not belong to any board member. I hope you will come home, even if only for one night. E.H. Clara folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest for a long moment. She did not decide right away. Over the following days, the invitation haunted her thoughts. Margaret noticed her distraction and asked gently, Will you go? Clara hesitated. I do not know. It feels strange to return to a place that hurt me. Margaret smiled. Sometimes we return not to relive pain, but to see how far we have walked past it. A month later, Clara boarded the train to New York. The journey felt longer than it should have. The closer she got to the city, the heavier her chest felt, as if each mile pulled her closer to a truth she was not ready to face. When she arrived at the Hayes Foundation's new headquarters, she was greeted by flashing lights and murmuring reporters. The event was grand but elegant, held in a restored art museum in downtown Manhattan. Paintings from the new program hung proudly on the walls, children's work from Maine, Vermont, and beyond. Clara's eyes softened when she saw one of her students' canvases displayed at the entrance. A voice came from behind her. They would not have existed without you. She turned slowly. Ethan Hayes stood there, dressed in a dark suit, but he looked different. His expression was gentler, his eyes quieter, as though the months apart had carved humility into him. Ethan, she said softly. Clara, he replied. Thank you for coming. For a moment, neither of them moved. The noise of the crowd faded into something distant. Then he spoke again. The Renewal Project was your vision. I only gave it a name. You gave it life, she said, and purpose. They walked together through the exhibit. Everywhere she looked, there were paintings filled with light, color, and hope. She saw her students' joy reflected in every frame. You did all this quietly, she said. It was not about me this time, Ethan replied. It was about keeping your promise alive. You once told me healing others helps us heal ourselves. I finally understand what that means. Clara looked at him, her voice calm but searching. And did you find peace? Not completely, he said, but I found clarity. I learned that love is not about ownership. It is about choosing someone's happiness, even if that happiness exists without you. Her eyes softened. That is not guilt speaking anymore. No, he said. It is gratitude. Oh, the announcement began, and the crowd gathered near the stage. The host introduced the renewal project as the most meaningful expansion of the Hayes Foundation in a decade. When Ethan stepped up to speak, he paused before the microphone and looked out across the crowd. This project began with a woman who taught me that scars are not flaws, they are proof that we survived, he said. She reminded me that beauty has nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with courage. Oh, he turned his gaze toward Clara. Tonight, we honor her strength, her compassion, and the lives she continues to change. Applause filled the room. Clara felt her heart swell, not with pride, but with quiet acknowledgement. For the first time, the world saw her not as a rumor, not as a scarred woman, but as someone who had built something lasting. After the ceremony, Ethan approached her once more. "I meant every word," he said. "I know you did," she replied, "and I am proud of what you have become." He smiled faintly. "That means more than you know." Outside, the night was calm. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement, glowing softly like the first light of morning. They stood side by side under the same sky that had once felt too big for both of them. Ethan broke the silence. "Clara, whatever happens next, I will never stop being grateful for you." She nodded. "And I will never forget the man who finally learned how to see." As she walked away, Ethan watched until she disappeared into the city crowd. He did not call after her. He did not need to. Some endings were not losses. They were quiet beginnings in disguise. That night, as Clara rode back to Maine, she opened her sketchbook and began a new drawing. It was of a man standing in the rain, looking toward the sunrise. Underneath, she wrote one line: "Love does not end. It transforms." Weeks passed after the gala, and New York began to hum with the soft pulse of early summer. The headlines about the renewal project had faded, replaced by stories of success and gratitude from communities across the country. Yet, behind the quiet triumph, something else was stirring, an old presence returning with new intent. Veronica Reed had watched the event from afar. Her name, once synonymous with the Hayes Empire, had disappeared from every corporate headline. The company she once influenced no longer returned her calls, and the people who had flattered her at every party now turned away. Her bitterness grew quietly, feeding on envy. She had lost her power, but she had not lost her spite. One afternoon, she appeared in the lobby of Hayes Dynamics, dressed impeccably in white, her smile too polished to be sincere. Mark, Ethan's assistant, froze at the sight of her. "Miss Reed, Mr. Hayes is not taking visitors today," he said firmly. Veronica tilted her head, pretending amusement. "Tell him it is about the renewal project. I am sure he will want to hear what I have to say." Before Mark could respond, the elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out, phone in hand. When he saw her, his expression shifted, instantly controlled, distant, guarded. "Mark, it is all right. I will handle this." Veronica's voice was smooth as silk. "Ethan, it has been months. I came to congratulate you on the foundation. The world seems to think you have changed." He nodded once. "I have." She smiled tightly. "Then perhaps you can forgive the past." "The past does not need forgiveness," he said. "It needs distance." For a moment, her eyes flashed with anger before she caught herself. "You always did like to sound noble. Tell me, does Clara know what you gave up for her? The company, the press, your reputation?" "She knows," Ethan interrupted calmly. "And that is all that matters." Her composure cracked. "Do you think she will stay? Women like her always leave. They love fixing broken men until they realize they are breaking themselves." Ethan's tone turned cold. "The difference between you and Clara is that she gives without needing to destroy. That is something you never understood." Veronica's smile vanished completely. "You are making a mistake trusting her," she hissed. "She will leave you with nothing." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but certain. "Even if she did, I would still have more than I ever had with you." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the center of the lobby, trembling with fury she could not disguise. That evening, Ethan sat in his office, looking out over the skyline. He knew Veronica would not give up easily. She had built her life on manipulation, and when power slipped away, she always looked for someone to blame. He opened his laptop and began drafting a press release, one that would close every loophole she might exploit. It was time to protect not just Clara's name, but her peace. While Ethan faced old ghosts, Clara continued her work in Maine. The renewal project had expanded faster than she could keep up with. Every week brought new requests from schools and hospitals asking for her guidance. Yet, even amid the noise of progress, she often found herself standing at the edge of the harbor, watching the horizon as if waiting for something unnamed. One afternoon, she received a call from Mark. "Mrs. Hayes, I apologize for calling unexpectedly. I thought you should know that Miss Reed has resurfaced." Clara's hand tightened around the phone. "What does she want?" "She came to see Mr. Hayes. He handled it professionally, but she may try to involve the media again." "How?" Clara's voice was calm but steady. "Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you telling me." After she hung up, Clara stood by the window for a long while. She was not afraid, but she felt the familiar weight of the world trying to drag her name through mud again. Only this time, she was not the same woman who had walked away months before. The next day, she wrote a letter to Ethan. "Ethan, I heard Veronica has returned. Do not let her poison your peace. The best revenge against cruelty is success that does not need to shout. I believe in what we built, even if we built it separately. Protect it, not for me, but for the people it helps. Clara." Ethan received the letter 2 days later. He read it twice before folding it neatly and placing it inside his desk drawer. He knew what he needed to do. The following week, Hayes Dynamics issued an official statement. It confirmed that Veronica Reed had been involved in leaking private information months prior, and that all evidence had been submitted to legal authorities. The announcement ended with a single line written by Ethan himself. "The Hayes Foundation stands for integrity, not intimidation. We will continue our work without fear." The media storm that followed lasted 3 days, and then it was gone. Veronica Reed left the country soon after, her name fading into silence. When Ethan called Clara to tell her, she answered on the second ring. "I read the statement," she said. "It is over," he replied. "I know," she said softly. "You did the right thing." He hesitated. "Clara, I do not know what happens next, but I am still here." Her voice was gentle. "I know you are." There was a pause, long, comfortable, and filled with everything words could not fix but time could. That evening, Clara walked to the beach near her home. The tide rolled in quietly, the waves brushing her shoes. She closed her eyes and whispered a small prayer, not for the past, but for clarity, for both of them. Far away, in his Manhattan apartment, Ethan sat by the piano. His fingers touched the keys softly, playing the melody she once called the sound of memory. It was not perfect, but it was honest. And in that moment, across miles of distance and silence, both of them understood that forgiveness was not a single act. It was a choice, renewed every day, like sunlight after rain. Summer arrived gently along the coast of Maine. The air grew warmer, the sky brighter, and the harbor filled with the scent of salt and pine. For Clara Monroe Hayes, the rhythm of the days had become simple again. She taught her students, tended her small garden, and painted whenever the evenings grew quiet. Yet, beneath that peace, she carried something she had not quite named, an ache that was not sadness, but the echo of something unfinished. Every morning, she checked the mail. Some days brought letters from the Renewal Project, full of photos from art programs across the country. Each image made her smile, a reminder that the seed she and Ethan had planted had grown far beyond them. But other days, when the mailbox was empty, she found herself wondering if perhaps the silence between them had become permanent. One late afternoon, while preparing supplies for the next week's art class, she heard the soft knock of Margaret at the studio door. The older woman entered with her usual gentle smile and a newspaper folded neatly under her arm. "Clara," she said, "have you seen this?" Clara wiped her hands and took the paper. The headline read, "Ethan Hayes to step down permanently from Hayes Dynamics." Underneath was a photo of Ethan shaking hands with the new CEO, a woman in her 40s. The caption noted that he planned to dedicate his time entirely to charity work through the Renewal Foundation. Clara's chest tightened as she read his quote. "Leadership means knowing when to let go. It means building something that can stand without you." Margaret watched her carefully. "He really did it," she said softly. "He gave it all away." Clara folded the paper slowly. "He always said he wanted to build something real. I suppose now he finally has." That night, Clara could not sleep. The waves outside whispered against the shore, and the moonlight spilled across her studio floor. She opened her sketchbook and found the page where she had written her last line months ago. Love does not end, it transforms. She traced the words with her fingertip, then turned the page and began to draw again. By morning, she knew what she had to do. 2 weeks later, Clara returned to New York, not for the noise, not for the past, but for closure. The city looked the same as when she had left, yet somehow, it felt quieter. She arrived at the headquarters of the Renewal Foundation, where the walls were now covered with paintings from every corner of the country. At the reception desk, she introduced herself simply. Clara Monroe Hayes. I believe Mr. Hayes is expecting me. The receptionist smiled. He is in the gallery upstairs. You cannot miss it. When she reached the top floor, the sound of soft piano music drifted from the open doors of the exhibition hall. She recognized the melody immediately, the same one Ethan used to play in the mansion late at night. Inside, she found him standing beside a newly unveiled painting. He turned as soon as he sensed her. For a brief moment, the air between them felt like the first breath after holding it too long. Clara, he said quietly. Ethan, she replied, her voice steady but warm. I saw the news. He nodded. It was time. You left everything behind, she said. Not everything, he answered. The foundation still stands. It is the only thing I ever built that truly mattered. Clara glanced around the gallery. Every wall was filled with art portraits of women and children, each painted by artists from the Renewal Program. But at the center of the room hung one painting larger than the rest. It was a woman standing by the ocean, her face turned toward the light. The scar on her cheek shimmered softly beneath the brushstrokes. Not hidden, not exaggerated, simply real. Clara stared at it in silence. You painted this? Ethan nodded. It is the only painting I've ever finished. I wanted the world to see what I finally learned to see. Her throat tightened, but she managed to whisper. You captured it perfectly. It is not about beauty. It is about being seen. He smiled faintly. Exactly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The piano music filled the silence, wrapping around them like a memory that refused to fade. Finally, Clara said softly, Why did you invite me here? Ethan met her eyes. Because there is one thing left that I have not returned to you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wedding ring she had left behind months ago. You once said you wanted peace, not pity. You have found it, but I thought maybe, just maybe, peace could share a home with love. Clara looked at the ring resting in his palm. The light from the skylight glinted off the gold, reflecting in her eyes. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling just slightly, love without trust is fragile, but trust without love is empty. I know, he said quietly. That is why I am not asking for a promise. Only a chance to start again without contracts, without conditions. She smiled faintly, her heart both steady and full. You have a strange way of asking, Mr. Hayes. He chuckled softly. Would you expect anything else from me? She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. No, she said. But I would expect you to play that piano again. It has been waiting. That evening, the two of them sat together in the gallery, the city lights glimmering beyond the tall windows. Ethan began to play the familiar melody, and Clara leaned quietly against the piano, her eyes closing as the music filled the room. For the first time since their wedding, there was no silence between them, only understanding, steady and bright, like dawn breaking over the sea. And as the final note faded into the air, Ethan looked up and whispered, Welcome home, Clara. She smiled, tears shining but unfallen. Home, she repeated softly, as though tasting the word for the first time. The next morning, sunlight poured gently through the wide windows of the Renewal Foundation gallery. The air smelled faintly of paint, paper, and the fresh flowers that Clara had placed in a tall vase by the piano. It was a new day, yet everything felt different. For the first time in a long while, Clara Monroe Hayes did not wake with the weight of doubt pressing on her chest. She found Ethan already there, standing by the same painting he had shown her the night before, the woman facing the sea. He looked calm, almost peaceful, the way people look when they finally stop running. Good morning, she said softly. He turned, smiling. You are early. So are you, she replied. They stood side by side for a moment, watching the light shift across the canvas. It painted both of their reflections faintly on the glass frame, two silhouettes standing together, neither ahead nor behind. "I keep thinking about how strange it is," Clara said after a pause, "that something as simple as a painting can carry years of mistakes and forgiveness." Ethan nodded. "Art has a way of telling the truth, even when we are too afraid to." They spent the rest of the morning organizing materials for the Foundation's next project. The goal was to open an art therapy center in New Orleans, a city still rebuilding its heart after years of hardship. As they sorted through files, Ethan paused and glanced at Clara. "I have a confession," he said. "When I first started this foundation, I thought I was saving other people, but now I realize they were saving me." Clara smiled gently. "That is how kindness works. It never stays one-sided." "Oh?" He hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you think people can truly start over?" She met his gaze, her voice calm but sure. "I do not think we start over. I think we continue with better choices." Ethan let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing. "Then I am glad we are continuing together." Later that afternoon, the foundation hosted a small workshop for local artists. Children painted at one end of the hall, while older volunteers restored donated murals. Clara moved among them with natural ease, her hands guiding a boy who was painting a sky too wide for the paper. Ethan watched from a distance, realizing that the woman who once hid from cameras was now teaching others to see the world in color again. When the workshop ended, Clara washed her hands and joined him by the door. "They are wonderful," she said. "All they need is someone to believe in them." Ethan looked at her. "You believed in me when no one else did." "Oh, I believed in the part of you that still remembered kindness," she replied. The day faded into evening. As the last guests left, Clara and Ethan stepped outside into the warm summer air. The city lights shimmered like distant constellations. For a while, they walked in silence, listening to the faint hum of traffic and the soft rhythm of their own steps. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Do you remember the night of the gala? You told me that love without trust is fragile, and trust without love is empty." Clara smiled faintly. "Yes." He stopped walking. "Then tell me, Clara, what is it when you have both?" She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "It is peace," she said simply. "And it is rare." He nodded slowly, his voice softer than the night breeze. "Then I do not ever want to lose it again." "Oh?" They reached the steps of the foundation building, where the piano melody from the night before still echoed faintly in their memory. Clara looked at him, her tone warm but teasing. "You know, you still owe me that song you never finished." He smiled. "Then I guess I will have to play it for the rest of my life." As they walked inside, the gallery lights glowed softly behind them, illuminating the painting of the woman by the sea. The scar on her cheek shimmered like a thread of gold under the light, a reminder that even broken things could become beautiful again. And for Ethan and Clara, the music began once more, not as an ending, but as the quiet, steady rhythm of a new beginning. The weeks that followed settled into a quiet rhythm that neither Ethan Hayes nor Clara Monroe Hayes had expected. Life between them no longer felt like a contract or a fragile truce. It felt like something steady, unspoken but certain, built from long days of shared purpose and small gestures that spoke louder than apologies ever could. Every morning, they arrived together at the Renewal Foundation. Ethan handled the logistics and board meetings, while Clara oversaw the art programs. Their offices were separated by only one glass wall. And sometimes, when she looked up from her sketches, she caught him watching her with that quiet half-smile, the one that still carried the softness of surprise, as though he could not believe she was really there. Outside, New York pulsed with summer. The city streets shimmered under the heat, and the gardens around the foundation bloomed with color. The noise of the world kept moving. But for them, time slowed. One afternoon, Clara led a workshop for adults recovering from trauma. They painted pieces that told stories of loss and rebirth. Ethan entered quietly halfway through, standing at the back of the room as Clara guided the participants. "Do not try to erase the scars in your work," she told them gently. "Let them be part of the art. Every line that breaks the surface tells a story of survival." Ethan listened, realizing she was not only teaching them, she was speaking her truth. When the class ended, and the room emptied, he approached her. "You were right," he said. "Scars do not ruin the painting. They make it real." Clara smiled, her hands still flecked with color. You finally understand. I think I do, he said quietly. For a long time I wanted everything perfect, every plan, every decision. But you showed me that perfection leaves no room for grace. She tilted her head, amused. And now? Now, he said. I would rather live in something imperfect but true. That evening, they stayed late at the foundation. The city outside glowed gold and amber as the sun sank behind the skyline. Clara sat by the piano, sketching while Ethan played a slow melody, one that sounded unfinished but full of hope. She looked up from her sketchpad and said softly, "You never told me why you kept that piano all these years." He smiled faintly. "Because it is the one thing that reminds me there is beauty in impermanence. Every note fades, but it still matters that you played it." For a long moment, she just watched him, her heart quiet but full. It was strange to think that the man who once measured everything in profit and progress now spoke in poetry without meaning to. When the music stopped, Ethan turned to her. "There is something I want to ask you," he said. "But not tonight. Tonight, I just want to sit here with you, and this peace." Clara nodded, her eyes soft. "Peace suits you, Ethan." They sat together in silence, the city lights flickering through the tall windows. Outside, a soft summer rain began to fall, tapping gently against the glass. Clara leaned her head slightly toward his shoulder, and he did not move away. In that quiet room, filled with the scent of paint, rain, and memory, they finally understood that love was not about grand gestures or second chances. It was about presence, about staying. When the last of the rain slowed, Clara whispered, "Do you know what this feels like?" Ethan turned to her, curious. "What?" She smiled, her voice barely above a breath. "Home." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing gently against the small scar on her wrist. "Then I never want to leave it again." No. The night closed around them softly, not as an ending, but as a promise that two people who had once been strangers bound by duty had learned how to choose each other freely, again and again, in the quiet moments that mattered most. The following months unfolded like a journey neither of them could have planned. Ethan Hayes and Clara Monroe Hayes began traveling from city to city, helping local teams open new branches of the Renewal Project. From Chicago to Seattle, from quiet rural towns to bustling downtown streets, their days were filled with laughter, work, and long drives beneath open skies. Everywhere they went, they left something behind: a mural painted by children, a garden planted in an old courtyard, a music room in a forgotten school. And with every new beginning, they discovered another layer of each other. In Chicago, Clara led the opening of a community art center built inside a restored warehouse. The walls were filled with color, and the floor echoed with music from local volunteers. Ethan watched her speak to the crowd, her voice steady, her presence radiant. When she thanked him publicly, he shook his head quietly, smiling as if to say, "This was always yours." Later that evening, they stood on the balcony overlooking the river. The air was cool, and the city lights shimmered across the water. Clara leaned against the railing, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The boardrooms, the meetings, the power?" Ethan looked at her, the reflection of the lights catching his face. "No," he said. "I thought power was control, but this—" He gestured toward the laughter drifting up from below. "This is what I was always chasing without knowing it." She smiled. "You finally learned to stop measuring your worth in numbers." He nodded. "And you taught me that love is not measured in words." Oh, their days became a rhythm: work, travel, and shared silence that spoke more deeply than conversation. Ethan handled logistics, Clara guided the creative teams, and together they built something that touched lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. One evening in Portland, they visited a small art class for war veterans. A man with trembling hands showed Clara a painting of his family, the colors uneven but alive. "I have not painted since before the war," he told her. "Your program gave me a reason to try again." When they left, Clara's eyes glistened. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "This is your legacy," he said quietly. She shook her head. "It is ours." In every city, they found fragments of themselves mirrored in the people they met: the broken who refused to stay broken, the hopeful who refused to give up. It reminded them of their own story, once scarred by misunderstanding but healed by persistence. One night, during a late train ride back to New York, Clara rested her head against Ethan's shoulder. The rhythmic sound of the tracks filled the silence between them. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that everything we went through was necessary? The mistakes, the distance, even the pain?" Ethan looked out the window at the blur of passing lights. "If it brought us here, then yes," he said. "Every wrong turn led me to you." Clara smiled faintly. "You have become good at this, sounding like a poet." He laughed quietly. "You spend enough time with an artist, and it rubs off." As the train crossed the bridge into the city, the skyline glowed in the distance, tall and familiar. But to both of them, it no longer symbolized ambition or pride. It was simply home. When they arrived, the staff from the Renewal Foundation greeted them with news. The program had expanded internationally. A partner organization in Europe wanted to collaborate, inspired by their model. Clara turned to Ethan, eyes bright with disbelief. "We did it," she whispered. He smiled, his voice warm and certain. "No, Clara. You did it. I just followed your light." That night, standing in the heart of the city where their story had begun in chaos and misunderstanding, Ethan and Clara Hayes finally understood that love, like art, was not about perfection. It was about creation continuous, imperfect, and alive. And as the city lights shimmered around them, they knew this was not the end of their journey. It was simply another canvas, waiting for the next stroke of color, the next act of grace, the next quiet proof that love could rebuild anything. Autumn arrived early that year. The leaves in Central Park burned gold and red, and the city seemed to exhale after months of relentless movement. For Ethan Hayes and Clara Monroe Hayes, the season brought not rest, but reflection. They had spent nearly a year building the Renewal Project into something bigger than either of them had imagined. The foundation now reached across borders, from local classrooms to international art programs. And yet, even amid the success, both of them sensed a quiet turning point, an invisible line between what they had accomplished and what still waited ahead. One cool morning, Clara stood by the window of their New York apartment, a mug of tea warming her hands. She watched the fog roll off the Hudson River, the skyline softened by mist. Ethan walked in behind her, still half-dressed for a board meeting he had promised to attend. "You have that look again," he said with a teasing smile. "What look?" she asked, glancing back. "The one that says you are thinking about leaving the city." She smiled faintly. "You know me too well." "Oh, of course," he said. "I have had practice." He poured himself coffee, then joined her by the window. "Where to this time? Another project?" "Not a project," she said softly. "Just quiet. A place where we can breathe." Ethan leaned against the wall, thoughtful. "You think we need that?" "I think we deserve it," she replied. "We have been building for so long, Ethan. Maybe it is time to simply live." He said nothing for a moment, and she could tell he was weighing her words. Finally, he nodded. "You are right. But if we leave the city, we leave the noise, the attention, the meetings, everything we worked for." Clara turned fully toward him. "Everything we worked for was never the noise. It was the meaning behind it, and that meaning does not disappear if we choose peace." He looked at her then, really looked at the calm strength in her eyes, at the woman who had once walked into his life, under a contract, and transformed it into something real. "You still surprise me," he said quietly. She smiled. "Good. I would hate to become predictable." By the end of the week, they had made their decision. Ethan informed the board that he would be taking a 6-month sabbatical, leaving the daily operations to his trusted team. Clara arranged for the Renewal Foundation to continue its art programs under new leadership. When they left New York, it was not an escape. It was a beginning. They chose a small town on the northern coast, where the cliffs met the sea. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the nights were filled with the steady hum of waves. The house they rented was simple wooden floors, wide windows, and a small garden overlooking the shore. On their first evening there, Clara stood outside, the wind tugging gently at her hair. "Do you ever think," she said softly, "that maybe this was what we were always trying to find? Not success, not redemption, just this." "Ah." Ethan joined her, slipping his arm around her shoulders. Maybe it took losing everything to learn what mattered. She leaned into him, her voice barely above the wind. "Then let us never forget it again." The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Ethan spent his mornings walking along the beach, his mind clear for the first time in years. Clara painted again, not for exhibitions or programs, but for herself. Her canvases filled with images of waves, sky, and light, each one a reflection of the calm they had fought to earn. Sometimes, in the afternoons, they worked together at the small community center in town. Children came to paint seashells and driftwood, their laughter echoing through the open windows. The locals quickly grew fond of them, though few knew who they really were. For once, Ethan and Clara lived without titles, without judgment, without the weight of expectation. One evening, after closing the art room, a little girl handed Clara a small seashell painted gold. "This is for you," the girl said, "because you taught me that broken things can still shine." Clara smiled, her throat tightening. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Later, as the sun sank behind the cliffs, Ethan found her sitting on the porch, turning the painted shell over in her hands. "You are quiet tonight," he said. She looked up at him, eyes glimmering. "I was just thinking about how far we have come, about how once people called me the Beast Bride, and now I am just Clara." Ethan sat beside her. "You were never the Beast Bride. The world just took too long to see the truth." They sat in silence, watching the horizon fade into dusk. The sky blazed orange and violet, the same colors that once filled her first painting after the fire. And for the first time, Ethan realized something profound. Peace did not mean stillness. It meant balance. It meant living with what remained, not fighting what was lost. When the stars began to appear, Clara reached for his hand. "Ethan," she said softly, "do you think we are done?" He smiled gently. "No, Clara. I think we are finally beginning." And in that quiet moment, beneath the sound of the sea, they both knew love, like the tide, was not about holding on. It was about returning, again and again, to the place where it all began. The sea had become their clock. Every morning, the waves whispered against the rocks before sunrise, and the soft light spilled through the wide windows of the small house on the northern coast. Ethan Hayes woke early, often before the birds stirred, while Clara Monroe Hayes lingered in the quiet comfort of their bed, listening to the familiar rhythm of his footsteps on the wooden floor. It had been nearly 4 months since they left New York, and life in the coastal town had taken on a rhythm both simple and profound. The townspeople no longer saw them as visitors. They had become part of the daily fabric: neighbors, teachers, friends. Clara taught art classes at the community center, and Ethan volunteered with local students who dreamed of starting small businesses. The once restless millionaire had learned to listen, to move slower, to see beauty in ordinary things. That morning, Clara found him sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The wind brushed through his hair, and the first light of dawn cast gold across his face. "You wake before the sun now," she said softly as she stepped outside, a blanket draped over her shoulders. He smiled without turning. "The ocean does not wait. It reminds me to start each day before everything else does." She sat beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "You sound more like a poet every week." "Do not tell anyone," he said with a quiet laugh. "It might ruin my reputation." "Oh." For a while, they simply watched the sea, the waves glinting like liquid silver under the rising light. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what comes next? When the foundation calls us back? When life becomes busy again?" Clara's eyes followed a seagull cutting through the air. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I remind myself that peace is not a place, it is a choice. We can carry this calm with us, wherever we go." "Oh?" He looked at her then, his gaze warm. "You always know how to say the thing that steadies me." She smiled faintly. "That is because I spent years learning how to steady myself." After breakfast, Clara prepared to meet her students. She carried with her a basket of paints and brushes, her long hair tied back loosely. Ethan watched her go, the morning breeze tugging at the hem of her linen dress, and he felt the familiar pull in his chest, the quiet awe of realizing that love could be both peaceful and powerful at once. At the community center, the children greeted her with bright smiles. They had grown attached to her lessons, not because she taught them how to paint perfectly, but because she taught them to see beauty, even in imperfection. "We are not fixing the world," she often told them. "We are learning to see it differently." That afternoon, Ethan visited the center to surprise her. He found her sitting on the floor with the children, showing them how to mix colors to create the shade of sunset. Her hands were smudged with paint, her laughter ringing through the room like soft music. When she noticed him at the door, she raised an eyebrow. "Are you here to inspect or to learn?" He leaned against the doorway, smiling. "Maybe both." One of the children handed him a brush. "You can paint too, mister." Ethan crouched beside them, dipping the brush into blue paint. "All right, but I warn you, I am not as good as your teacher." The little girl grinned. "That is okay. She can fix it." Clara chuckled. "He is learning not to fix everything, actually." Later, as the children left one by one, Ethan helped her clean up the brushes. "They adore you," he said. "They adore color," she replied. "I just show them that color exists even on gray days." He smiled at that. "You did the same for me." As the sun began to set, they walked home along the beach. The sand was cool beneath their feet, and the waves rolled gently beside them. The sky stretched wide and painted itself in shades of coral and violet. Clara stopped suddenly, turning to face him. "You know," she said softly, "when we first met, I thought you were incapable of simplicity. Everything about you was precision and control." He laughed quietly. "And you were chaos disguised as calm." Maybe we needed both," she said. "Structure and freedom, reason and faith." He reached for her hand. "And love to hold it all together." They walked in silence for a while, the sound of the sea carrying their thoughts. When they reached the house, the porch light flickered on, casting a soft glow across the doorway. Ethan paused before stepping inside. "Clara," he said quietly, "there is something I have been meaning to ask." She looked at him, her expression curious. "What is it?" He took her hands gently, his thumbs brushing against her fingers. "When we first married, it was for everything but love. Then it became about forgiveness. But now, standing here, I want it to be about choice. So I am asking again, not as the man you once pitied or the husband you learned to forgive, but as the man who loves you fully. Will you marry me again?" Clara's breath caught in her throat. The ocean wind rustled through the trees, the sound like applause from the earth itself. She smiled through the tears that welled in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, "you do not need to ask." He shook his head. "I do, because this time it has to be your choice, not circumstance." She stepped closer, resting her forehead against his. "Then yes," she said softly. 1,000 times, yes." The next morning, the entire town gathered on the beach. It was not a grand affair, no photographers, no lavish ceremony. Just a circle of neighbors, a few children holding flowers, and the sound of waves folding against the shore. Clara wore a simple white dress, her hair loose in the breeze. Ethan stood barefoot beside her, smiling as if the sun itself had risen just for this moment. When they exchanged vows, it was not about promises of perfection or wealth. It was about presence, about seeing each other, fully and without fear. "I once believed love was weakness," Ethan said as he placed the ring on her finger. "But you taught me that love is strength. It is the courage to stay." Clara's voice trembled as she answered, "And you taught me that trust is not given. It is earned, one choice at a time. I choose you, again and again." The crowd applauded softly as they sealed their vows with a kiss, gentle, steady, and certain. The ocean roared behind them, as if echoing their promise. That evening, as the town celebrated with laughter and music, Ethan and Clara slipped away to the quiet shore. The moon rose over the water, casting silver light across the waves. Clara leaned against him, her voice soft but sure. "We began with misunderstanding," she said. "And now we end with peace." Ethan kissed her hair, whispering, "No, Clara, this is not the end. This is the part where peace becomes forever." Oh, and beneath the endless rhythm of the sea, their story finally found its calm, the kind of calm that comes not from absence of storms, but from learning how to stand together through every one of them. The days after their second wedding flowed like gentle tides, steady, certain, and full of quiet joy. Life on the coast settled into a peaceful rhythm that suited Ethan Hayes and Clara Monroe Hayes perfectly. Every sunrise felt like a new chapter, and every evening ended with laughter echoing softly against the sound of the sea. They had no plans to return to the city soon. The world they had built in New York, The foundation, the partnerships, the headlines still existed, but it no longer defined them. Instead, their purpose had deepened into something simpler: living intentionally, giving quietly, and finding meaning in ordinary days. Every morning, Clara painted by the wide windows overlooking the ocean. Her work had changed. Gone were the heavy, storm-colored canvases of the past. Now she painted light. Sunlight dancing on water, hands holding, children laughing. Each brushstroke carried calm. She said once that her art was no longer about what hurt, it was about what healed. Ethan spent his mornings walking along the beach, helping the fishermen repair their nets, or reading in the small library that overlooked the harbor. The man who once managed empires now found peace in small acts of usefulness. When he was not outside, he worked remotely with the Renewal Project, ensuring the organization's future remained stable and transparent. The board respected his distance and admired the way he led without needing control. In the afternoons, they often met at the local cafe run by a cheerful woman named Rosie. She had become one of their closest friends, though she never treated them like anyone special. To her, they were just Ethan and Clara, the couple who drank too much coffee and spent too much time looking at the sea. One windy afternoon, as they sat by the window with their tea, Rosie came by their table. "You two have been here nearly a year," she said with a grin. "Are you staying forever?" Clara smiled. "Forever sounds nice, but we might have to share it with a few new towns." Rosie laughed. "Whatever you decide, this place is better because of you." After she left, Ethan looked at Clara thoughtfully. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had met differently?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "You mean without the contract? The scandal? The chaos?" He nodded. "Yes, without all that." She smiled softly. "Then you would not have learned to see me, and I would not have learned to forgive you. I think we met exactly the way we needed to." Ethan chuckled. "Only you could find grace in the mess we made." She looked at him with quiet affection. It was never just a mess. It was a beginning disguised as a disaster. That evening, they walked home through the soft rain. The ocean mist clung to their clothes, and the scent of wet pine filled the air. Inside the house, Clara lit a fire, while Ethan opened a bottle of wine. The warmth spread quickly through the small space. "Do you remember," Clara said as she settled beside him, "the first time you told me you loved me?" He smiled. "You mean the time you did not believe me?" "Yes," she said, laughing softly. "You looked so sure, and I was terrified." "I was too," he admitted. "Because I finally meant something I could not control." They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that needed no words. Outside, the rain drummed lightly against the windows. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, her voice low and thoughtful. "Do you think people can really change, Ethan? Or do we just grow into who we always were?" He considered that for a moment. "Maybe both. Change comes when someone believes you can be more than your mistakes, and you did that for me." She smiled. "And you reminded me that courage is not loud. It is choosing to stay soft in a hard world." The next morning, a letter arrived from New York. It was from the new director of the Renewal Foundation. The letter invited them to a special event, a 10-year anniversary celebration of the program they had started. The board wanted both of them to attend as guests of honor. Clara read the letter carefully, then handed it to Ethan. "It feels strange," she said, "like looking back at another lifetime." "Oh." He nodded. "Maybe it is time to close that chapter properly. Not by running from it, but by honoring it." They agreed to go. When they arrived in New York a week later, the city greeted them differently. The same skyscrapers towered above, but the noise no longer intimidated them. It was just another rhythm, fast, loud, but alive. The Renewal Foundation headquarters had changed too. The lobby walls were lined with artwork created by children and survivors from all over the world. A plaque near the entrance bore their names. Founded in compassion. Built on courage. As they entered the main hall, a round of applause filled the room. Staff, volunteers, and beneficiaries stood to greet them. The director, a woman in her 30s, welcomed them warmly. "This organization exists because two people decided that healing was stronger than pride," she said, "and their legacy continues to guide us every day." Clara looked around the room, her heart swelling with quiet pride. Ethan watched her, remembering how once she had stood trembling under the flash of cameras, accused of things she never did. Now, she stood tall, radiant, and free. When it was time for them to speak, Ethan took the microphone first. "We started this project because we believed broken things could still be rebuilt," he said. "What we did not realize was that we were rebuilding ourselves too. This place, these people remind us that second chances are not given. They are created through patience, faith, and the courage to try again." Then he handed the microphone to Clara. Her voice was calm, clear, and full of gratitude. "I once thought scars made us less beautiful," she began. "Now I know they are proof that we are still here. Every person in this room carries a story, and every story has light, even in its darkest corners. Thank you for keeping that light alive." The room erupted in applause, but this time the sound did not overwhelm her. It wrapped around her gently, like a song finally sung in harmony. That night, as they walked through the city streets, Clara turned to Ethan. "Do you realize," she said softly, "we came back to the place that once broke us, and now it feels like home." He took her hand. "That is because home is not a place anymore, Clara. It is us." They walked hand in hand through the glowing streets of Manhattan, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement like stars fallen to earth. Behind them, the Renewal Foundation continued its work, proof that love and compassion, once set in motion, never truly ended. And as the night deepened around them, Clara thought about how far they had come from strangers bound by duty to partners bound by choice, and she knew with perfect certainty that no storm, no distance, no shadow could ever undo what they had built together. Because the truest kind of love, she realized, was not about being saved. It was about saving each other, again and again, through every new beginning. The morning after the Renewal Foundation anniversary, the city of New York shimmered with early autumn sunlight. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of roasted coffee and rain-soaked streets. Ethan Hayes and Clara Monroe Hayes stood at the window of their hotel suite, watching the city awaken beneath them. Cars moved like small silver threads, and the world below felt both distant and familiar, like a memory they had finally made peace with. Clara sipped her tea slowly, her reflection in the glass framed by the skyline she once feared. "It feels different this time," she said softly. Ethan turned toward her. "What does?" "Being here. Years ago, this city swallowed me whole. Now it feels like it is giving something back." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it is not the city that changed. Maybe it is us." She set her cup down and looked at him with the quiet certainty that had become her way of speaking truth. "No, Ethan. We both changed because we stopped living to prove something. That is the difference." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her wedding band. "You know," he said, "I spent half my life thinking strength meant control. But now I think it means surrender the willingness to be seen exactly as you are." Clara smiled. "Then maybe we are both strong now." Later that morning, they visited the foundation one last time before leaving the city. The staff greeted them warmly, but Ethan and Clara stayed only briefly. They did not need long speeches or attention. Their work was already alive in others' hands, and that was the legacy they had hoped for. Before they left, the new director handed Clara a small box wrapped in ribbon. "Open it later," she said with a smile. "It is a thank you from everyone who has been touched by your story." Outside, the sky had turned gray with the promise of rain. Ethan hailed a cab, and they rode in comfortable silence. The driver recognized them from a newspaper photo pinned behind his mirror. "You two started that art project for kids, right?" he asked with a grin. Ethan nodded modestly. "We helped. Others made it what it is." The driver laughed. "Well, my niece paints because of it. She says it makes her feel like she can breathe. So, thank you." Clara's eyes softened. "That means more than you know." When they arrived at the train station, the air smelled faintly of metal and coffee. People hurried around them, but the noise faded into the background. Ethan bought 2 tickets to Maine, their true home now. As the train pulled away from the city, Clara rested her head against the window, watching the skyline shrink until it disappeared completely. "Do you think we will ever come back?" she asked. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. "Only if there is a reason worth returning for. But right now, I think our reason is waiting by the sea." They spent the ride in quiet conversation, their words weaving between memories and dreams. When they arrived, the coastal air wrapped around them like an embrace. The familiar sound of waves greeted them as they walked down the path to their small home overlooking the cliffs. Inside, everything was just as they had left it. Her easel by the window, his books stacked near the fireplace, the seashell the little girl had painted resting on the mantel. It felt like the house itself had been waiting patiently for their return. That evening, after dinner, Clara finally opened the box from the foundation. Inside was a hand-bound book, filled with letters and drawings from people all over the world, children, teachers, and survivors of hardship. Each page carried a story of gratitude. One drawing showed a pair of hands holding a cracked but glowing heart. Underneath it, a child had written in careful letters, "Love does not have to be perfect to be real." Clara felt her eyes fill with tears. She handed the book to Ethan, and for a long moment, they said nothing. Then she whispered, "This is what we built. Not a company, not an image. A way for people to feel seen." Ethan closed the book gently, and to remind us that what we went through had purpose. The night deepened outside, and the moon rose over the ocean. The house glowed softly under its light. Clara walked out onto the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The wind carried the sound of waves crashing gently against the rocks below. Ethan joined her a moment later, his hands in his pockets. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think that forgiveness was a single moment like a door you opened once and walked through forever. But it is not. It is something you choose every day." Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "And love?" She turned toward him, smiling. "Love is the same. You choose it every morning, even when it feels ordinary." He reached for her hand, and together they stood in silence, watching the horizon. The sky above them stretched endless and full of stars. Somewhere in that vastness, the last pieces of their past finally dissolved, leaving only the present steady, peaceful, and alive. Weeks later, the town held its annual art festival. Clara's students filled the community center with color and laughter. Ethan helped hang the paintings while Clara prepared the exhibit. When the doors opened, the locals flooded in, admiring the work of young artists who had learned to paint their hearts instead of hiding them. One painting, displayed near the entrance, drew everyone's attention. It was a portrait of a woman standing by the ocean, her scar faint but visible, her gaze lifted toward the horizon. At the bottom, the student had written in neat letters, "Inspired by my teacher, Mrs. Hayes. She taught me that broken things can shine too." Clara's eyes glistened as she read the words. Ethan placed his arm gently around her shoulders. "Looks like your light keeps spreading," he said softly. She leaned into him. "Ours," she corrected. "It was always ours." As the evening faded into twilight, the two of them stood by the open doors, watching lanterns rise over the water. Each lantern carried a wish from someone in town. When it was their turn, Clara wrote a single line on their lantern before releasing it into the sky. "To every soul learning to begin again." They watched it drift upward, glowing against the darkening sky until it disappeared among the stars. Ethan turned to her, his voice quiet but sure. "So, what now?" She smiled. "Now, we live, and we keep choosing this every day." The waves crashed softly below the cliffs, the night air cool and clean. And as the last lantern vanished into the heavens, their story once tangled in mistakes and pretense rested in its true form, a testament to love that had been tested, refined, and made whole through forgiveness, truth, and time. For in the end, Ethan and Clara Hayes did not just find each other, they found peace. And that, above all, was their greatest masterpiece.